like I have the weirdest art, and I hung it all over the house. I'm like, I can't wait till she sees this crap. She's gonna hate it. And so she's walking up the driveway, and I just looked at her, and I was like, "Do you want to be married to me?" Like, it wasn't a rhetorical question. Like, after all this, do you want to be married to me?
Welcome to What We Really Want, conversations about connection. Settle in and get ready for a great conversation. Let's talk about what we really want.
Ready?
Ready.
Hey friends, welcome back to What We Really Want. Greg and Stacy with you today for episode 40. Our guest is Harrison Scott Key, and the name of the episode is, Do You Want to Be Married to Me? That's a question you've already heard in the little clip that opened up our episode. Harrison Scott Key is an author, a speaker, a college professor, and he's the author of 3 books, including New York Times bestseller, How to Stay Married, the most insane love story ever told. Hun, you were the one who introduced me to that book not too long ago.
Yes, a friend had told me about it and just thought it would be something I would be interested in reading. And I actually listened to the audio, and it was so good. Yeah.
And you told me about it, told me what the gist was, that it's his memoir of his experience with infidelity. Mm-hmm. But unlike our story, it was his spouse who was unfaithful to him.
Yeah.
Multiple times with the same affair partner over a number of years. Mm-hmm. And so I was really interested in your perspective on the book. Yeah. Having had the similar experience to what he had. Wasn't exactly the same, but it definitely involved infidelity, betrayal. What was it like for you listening through that this far down the road for us?
Yeah, I was curious to hear, I guess, from a male perspective. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of differences, I guess, but so many things that I resonated with.
So many things that he said in the book.
That he said, like, even just when there was going to be a conversation before he knew anything, and just all the things that were going through his mind, wondering what it could be, or just all the things you don't know, and just the rapid fire thoughts that are in your head, trying to figure things out. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of the anger.
Something that I noticed that I thought was kind of a cool, I don't know, the word that came to mind was juxtaposition, but that seemed a little bit
that's a big word.
pretentious, was that some people who read the story were like, dude, why did you stay in it for so long? Mm-hmm. You know, why did you just continue to subject yourself to that kind of pain, you know, especially when when you realized that it had happened again? Mm-hmm. On the one hand, you could say, wow, he seemed really slow paced and long suffering. But then just when he's describing just the thought processes that are going on, I mean, there's so much reactivity in your mind because your mind's trying to figure out, like, what just happened? Yeah. What does this mean? You know, you're flash recounting everything that's happened in the relationship. Was any of it real? Mm-hmm. And so there's a whole lot of speed. Yeah. I mean, and you've talked about that. Yeah. That there is so much, like, just lightning speed going on inside your mind. It's interesting because if you've gone through it, to hear somebody say, oh, well, you seem very measured and steady, like, probably didn't feel that way.
No. Well, and I know that I was thinking, man, I don't know why he stayed so long, or I think we all do that. And I think it's so important to remember, if you're not in the story, you don't know what you would do. I had people say to me what they would do if it were them, and that's not helpful. So I love you, listeners. If you've done that, please don't do that. Don't tell people what you would do if they're sharing something they're going through. Whatever it is, if you can just not say, well, this is what I would do, because you just don't know.
Something that is unexpected, I think, is just how quickly he can shift between making you laugh and making you cry.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's a very emotional story. Mm-hmm. And if you're listening to the audiobook, there's so many things you're like, oh my gosh, like, that's hilarious. And is it appropriate to laugh about, about that because of what he's talking about? And he shared in the interview, he was writing these things, what turned into the book, he was writing it down basically as a journal while it was still happening. Mm-hmm. One of the things that's cool and refreshing to me is just to hear the freshness of it, to hear the realism of it, just him talking about, like, well, I mean, this is where we are right now.
Right.
And as people who kind of live in a community where our marching orders are living one day at a time, I mean, that's really underscored by their story, because we really don't have any guarantees. We make vows, we make promises, but we're broken people, and we do things. I mean, I know firsthand doing things that go against the vow that you made with every intention of keeping it.
Yeah. And it's not I did not hear at all like a 1 foot out the door.
No.
But right now, this is where we are, and we are fighting for marriage today. I love that Lauren was able to share some of her story. I was so excited. I didn't see that coming, and I was just almost giddy and jumping up and down in my car because I was driving when I was listening to it.
Because Harrison's wife, Lauren, wrote the second to last chapter of the book. And it's like, by the time that happens, it's like you wanted to meet her.
Yes. Something about how people would think she's like the villain and make her out to be the monster or whatever. And I guess because of our story, and I have come to a place of empathy and understanding of your own story, that I just broke for her. And I had like so much compassion for her, and I was so excited to hear her side.
That's cool. Yeah. Well, we hope that you'll feel compassion for yourself, for people in your life who are going through maybe similar things. We talk about anger, we talk about deception, we talk about forgiveness. This was such a cool conversation with Harrison Scott Key. Hope that you're already familiar with him, but if not, you're welcome. That we're your introduction to a really, really great author, speaker. We hope that you will really enjoy and be drawn into deeper connection with people you love through this conversation. It's episode 40. It's called Do You Want to Be Married to Me? And our guest is Harrison Scott Key, and the conversation starts right now. Harrison Scott Key, we're so thankful that you're here and excited to have a conversation with you today.
Well, thanks for the invitation.
And we've both recently read How to Stay Married. Really are excited to talk to you about that and other things.
Let's do it, man. You can ask me anything and everything. I promise you I have been asked questions that I never thought I would be asked.
Well, let me start it by asking what we ask all of our guests, Harrison, is what do you really want out of our conversation today?
I would love for you to Venmo me $10,000 by the end. That would be fantastic. That would help me cover some of the tuition I'm paying for my child in college.
That is a great request.
Beyond that, I just like to have, these conversations can go any which way. And I've probably done 150 podcast interviews in the last 2 years since this book came out. And I always find myself learning something new every time. And I'd like to learn something new too.
Yeah. I love to hear that. And your first request, or your first what you want, makes a lot of sense just from something you said in your TED Talk that, you and Lauren didn't write the book for money. You wrote it for what the money will allow you to buy.
Yes.
Well,
oh, that's funny.
You said you've done about 150 of these since the book came out. We're just a couple of weeks, I think, away from 2 years since the book's been out. And I would love to talk to you today about kind of your perspective now that the release and the subject matter is not quite as fresh, just to kind of talk about if anything has changed, if anything has gotten deeper. Plus, I just really love the theme and how you talked about forgiveness. I think that if I was to say what I really want, it would be just to really explore your experience with forgiveness. Let's just jump right in. I'd love to hear what 2 years of having this book out into the world has been like for you and for Lauren and your family.
Pretty awful, honestly. At least at first. Not surprising. I mean, when you write a nonfiction book in which you are a main character and the people that you love most are main characters, which I've written 3 of those books so far. It's going to be people want that vulnerability when you interview with them or when you come to their bookstore or book festival in their town. The book is. Writing anything autobiographical is so challenging because you have to be vulnerable. in a way that is, but also engaging. You want to write a book that people want to read and finish it. Otherwise, what's the point in talking, And so you expect a certain amount you expect to have to sort of walk around with that vulnerability when you're promoting a book. And that can be hard. I mean, writing the book and being vulnerable in that space of the page is already hard. And because you have to, not hard like that, you're resistant to it. You're resisting being vulnerable when you're writing. Although sometimes you are, but it tends to be very unconscious. Like you don't want to go in a certain direction and you don't really know why, but you just don't. And I'm sure you guys see this in therapy. You have a client who just doesn't want to go there. And you're like, maybe that's where you should go if you don't want to go there, And it's the same way with writing. But what's hard is that then you have to, it's really hard to describe. It'd be like, you go, let's just keep the therapy analogy. Yeah. You go into therapy and say you have a good, hour-long sessions every 1 or 2 weeks for a year. And it's hard, right? It's hard. It's vulnerable. You're growing, you're sharing, you're learning. And then it would be like, okay, you've done that for a year. Now you're going to go around the world and then you're going to tell everybody all the things that you experienced in that year. And you got to do it in a way that makes them seem authentic. So it's emotionally very exhausting to promote a book like this. This third one, far more so than my first 2 books. And those were pretty vulnerable too, especially the first one I, wrote about Mississippi and racism and misogyny and hating and loving my father and just all these things. And that was hard to do. But this one, the marriage book, has been especially hard. And I kind of knew that, and I knew that was one of my hesitations in publishing this book. Was I just like, did I want to be that guy? Did I want to be known for this?
Right.
And, it was a complicated thought process that led to our publishing the book. A lot of conversations with friends, and of course, between Lauren and me, between my editor and my agent and Lauren and me. We didn't just say, hey, let's write a book. Boom, let's go. It was much more like, what is this going to be like for our kids if we do this? What are the pros? What are the cons? So promoting it, at first it would, like when the book came out in early June of 23, and at first, it was fine. You have a lot of adrenaline when a book first comes out, but then you start doing these interviews and people start coming up to you at the book signing table and they start DMing you with everything that has ever gone wrong in their marriage.
Yeah,
and
right.
They send you their phone numbers, ask you to call them. Can we please talk? My wife just kicked me out of the house for XYZ reason. I just heard about your book. I'm 3 pages in. Will you call me? That was like, at first it was funny. It was like, oh, this is weird. Yeah. And, Lauren was getting the same sort of DMs. Her Instagram account is private in part for that reason, but she was still people were still finding her and asking her the same thing. Like, can we talk? Or, I had an affair, and I've never met anybody else who's admitted that they've had an affair, and I would love to talk to you, Lauren. And it was just so much for both of us. Yeah. And so every day that was happening. And by the end of that summer of 23, I was just fried. My heart, my brain, everything was fried because I was trying to engage with people, when they would message me with something really intense. And, you don't want to just give the thumbs up emoji, great job. Like, I don't, here's a suicide hotline number. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. And I would come up with some sort of classic responses that I felt would be helpful to people. And I got to even where I was copying and pasting because I just couldn't engage.
Well, you kind of had to, didn't you? I would imagine that with the subject matter of the book, you guys knew you were going to get a lot of people who were resonating with it. But I think I wouldn't have expected them to push in that personally. I think that would have surprised me. Did it surprise you?
The frequency of it did. Mm-hmm. I wrote a book about my dad dying. And so, for like 3 years, random men on the street would just stop me and say, my dad died too. And they would hug me. And, it was just kind of like, okay, I'm sorry, Mm-hmm. but this was like 10, 15 DMs every day for 6 months.
Wow.
And then you just stopped reading them. Even ones that were like, hey, love the book, like that was it. But I'd stopped reading them altogether. And then, I made the mistake of reading, all the negative Goodreads reviews that were mounting up. And those were just so cruel. Even if they said things that I kind of agreed with, I was just like, this is not healthy for me to be reading this and all this. And so I just kind of detached. I stopped doing as many. I would continue to do interviews like this every couple of weeks, but I didn't go on the road for a while. I got really tired of having to tell everybody how bad I was at being married. It just it was continual. And also, I write funny books. And when you write funny books, it's fun to promote them in a funny way. And this was really hard, even though the book is very funny. But it's like, if a parent dies, somebody close to you dies, and you see an old friend, say a year later, and your old friend's like, hey, how's your dad? And you say, oh, he passed away last year. Now, you're not really grieving so heavily anymore, right? You buried your dad a year ago. But this person, when they find out that your dad, who maybe coached them in Little League Baseball, just died, they're sad. And you have to kind of match that sadness so you don't make them feel bad. And so that's what it was like with this book. Every time I had to tell the story to a new audience, I was like, oh, I'm so tired of like reliving this story. That's why it's in a book. Like, just go read the book, man. Even though nobody asked me to write it. Yeah. And so I couldn't be angry with anybody but myself, but it was tough. And over time, and I was very honest with Lauren about this. By 2024, I was in a pretty severe depression because of all this. And I felt just ready to move on to a new book project. Let the book out there do its work with people, let people enjoy it, review it, whatever. And, I was very honest with my wife about this and my friends. And over time, it's gotten so much better. Just the heat of it died down. I maybe get a DM now once a month, infrequently enough that I can engage with that person in a way that doesn't like give me PTSD. So it's gotten a lot better. And I will say these types of conversations are different. It's not a burden to talk to somebody like you guys about it. It was just being kind of assaulted by strangers when I didn't expect it. That was really hard. And I for a long time, I wanted to write something silly or weird that was just kind of cleanse the palate. And I've lately come to see that I might need to lean into the problem a little bit, the same way that we were talking about earlier with like therapy. Like, if this is something that's really bothering me, maybe that's what I need to write about. I'm not saying I'm going to write some sequel, How to Stay Married Part 2. But that I need to really think and reflect on why I felt so terribly and why I normally love to speak to audiences. I spoke at a conference in New York 2 weeks ago about the book, an audience of about 300 or 400 at this really old Episcopal church in the Village. And it was so awesome. And I hadn't done a talk in like months. Yeah. And I was really dreading this talk, just because it had been a while and I didn't know if I'd still have the magic. And it went really well and people really laughed and I had a great time. And it just reminded me that like I can have fun with this and I can help other people even with a topic that's heavy like this. So it's gotten so much better.
Well, it seems that makes so much sense as far as how it was in that initial season of promoting it when the book was new. But I'm also thinking about the fact that when that happened, it hadn't been all that long since the experience itself. And now I don't know how long it takes you to write a book, but if what you were writing about was in 2020 and the book came out in 2023, I imagine you started writing it probably a year after Lauren came home, probably not much more than that.
No, I actually started it before she came home. Okay. I started the book while we were separated. I didn't quite know what it would turn out to be, but I did. I was writing about our marriage and writing about sort of our past. Even before I knew about this affair, I had already kind of started to write about that. And faith, I talk about faith a lot in the book, and I was kind of writing about that. And so then when everything blew up, it was like, oh, I guess I have to write about this. I was clearly writing about those topics before I knew, because I think I knew something was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I did start writing it before she came home, but I didn't finish. I mean, I didn't really finish the book until 2022, summer of 2022. So a year before it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, really guys, like I just had PTSD. I mean, I was out here trying to, promote this book, and I had gone through the absolute worst period of my life. And funny or not, like, that's heavy stuff. And I didn't have time for therapy when I was on book tour. And so that was a lot of it. I was still healing. And Lauren did do some book events with me, and she still does. She just doesn't do as many. I mean, she works, she can't travel with me every time I go somewhere because we still have 2 kids at home. I think it was easier for her. She seemed a lot more emotionally healthy that year after the book came out than I did.
You said you had PTSD. Is that something you realize now? Did you realize it at the time that was going on?
No. If you had told me that, I'd been like, oh yeah, that makes sense. People did ask, like, well, why'd you write the book so soon? Like, you should have waited. I mean, you might still get divorced. And that's true. All that's true. We still might get divorced. Like, anybody who's married can get divorced.
Right.
But I wrote it. The reason I wrote it so quickly, and I wrote it in the midst of sort of what was going on, is that it was sort of like war reporting, like I was in the field with the Army and things were happening. And so I was writing these things. So I was getting every detail and what it felt like. And I knew that my feelings would change and evolve. And you do right. If I wrote this book now, it would have a different tone. I don't know how different. I think it would probably be funnier and sadder. I think it would be a little bit of both if I wrote it now. But that's why I wrote it quickly, because everything felt so fresh. And I honestly, guys, I mean, I just kind of said, screw it. I mean, this is happening. This is wild. It is blowing my mind every step of every day. And I feel like I have to put this story on paper. Now, I did put it on paper. The discussion about when and where and how and why to publish it was a different conversation that I had with a lot of people. But I was writing it in real time. And so, yeah, now I realize, like, oh gosh, I was definitely still processing. And that comes through, I think, in the final chapter. I say, I still feel terrible about every other day. And I don't know if we're going to stay married. I mean, in part, it's kind of what I like about the book, that it wasn't tidy. It's not all happy endings and just have a date night every 3 weeks. No, it wasn't that at all. It was much more honest.
Yeah.
I know. I did not want to write that book.
Yeah.
I was afraid. Like, my agent did ask me, she was like, do you want to like wait 5 years and write this book? And I didn't want to wait. I felt like it would be too tidy. The ending if we stayed married, the ending would be a little too happy and tidy. And that's not realistic in most cases.
Yeah. I was thinking about when you were talking about people messaging you, this is very different, but it made me think about what we do. And it's been hard, even doing it as a ministry. Probably we started 6 years into doing it officially. 6 years
into our own recovery
and therapy and all of that. But still, like, I think in a different way, people are reaching out, but it's because we're a ministry and that's what they're supposed to do. But I think just the continual talking about it just keeps it there, and I got it to a point where when I would hear women sharing their side, it didn't take me down or make me real sad. But I think the cumulative, probably over the years, it still can be really hard. So I identified in a weird way with that. But I was thinking about, I was wondering when you just talked about, it kind of sounds like not more like, but like journaling as you were writing and then deciding to actually make it a book, publish it. Did you and Lauren pretty much feel on the same page about that? Or was it like harder for one of you to?
Oh, it was definitely harder for her.
Yeah.
There's a lot of reasons it was harder for her. It's very easy to assume she's the villain of this book. She had this affair with this guy. And people who don't read the book or who only read the first page or the first chapter, whatever, could easily walk away being like, wow, this guy is a real jackwad, for writing this book about his wife having this affair. Like, it seems like such a shaming move. And I knew that people would assume that all this book did is call forth whatever you already think about marriage. It just made you feel it very intensely.
Right.
Like people who are, bitter and angry or distrustful of the institution, they read this book and go like, man, this guy's an idiot. This girl is an idiot. They never should have written this book. They never should have been married. And then other people who have a more hopeful view of marriage and love and forgiveness would have the opposite view. And you think, oh, this is great. I'm so glad a book like this exists in the world. But Lauren and I both knew that it would look like a real target on her face when this book came out. And she's not used to being in the limelight. I have a lot more comfort with that just because of what I do. I'm also a ridiculous circus clown extrovert. And I've done stand up and, improv and been a performer, and I played drums in a band. And my wife, aside from dancing and ballet, 30 years ago, she's not that way. And so it was tough. And then we talked about, I basically said when she came home after a few weeks, after it was clear that like we were both going to really try for the first time with her, maybe ever in our marriage, it seemed like she really wanted to try. And we were both rock bottom, stripped bare, on a gurney in the ICU of love. I mean, it was bad. And so once it was obvious that we were both kind of stuck in the ICU of love together now, slowly recovering, I said, I could bring this up to her. I can mention it to her. So, hey, I don't know if you know this about me, but I am a writer. At the time we'd been married for 20 years, and she's like rolling her eyes. I'm like, I really think I have to write about this. And that's very scary to me, but I think I have to write about it, and she got mad, and she was like, instantly knee-jerk reaction. No, please go write a book about the dog. Like, people love books about dogs. Like, don't say this. So, a few days later, I was like, look, I'm just going to write it. And then when I'm done, you can read it, and then you can decide then. And she's like, fine. And we were both in therapy like 3 times a week. I mean, when we were in the ICU, we were in therapy more than we were anywhere else. And so she was also in a process where she was sharing. I mean, I was really learning to listen during that period, and she was learning to share. And she would practice sharing. And so she would go out to dinner with, a girlfriend of hers, and she would just tell them the story. And after like 3 or 4 of these, her friends were like, you guys have to publish this. And so I finished the book. I showed it to her, and she was like, she read it. I was so nervous. And this was in 22. And she said that she was surprised that it was so funny. She said she thought it would be more angry or bitter or something, or sadder. And she was surprised, and she actually liked it. She gave me some editorial feedback, which was really unusual and surprising. She was like, I think you should say more about this and less about this. And, and then she wrote a chapter for the book, and it was just this conversation of like, all right, how do we feel? And then we would talk to my editor about it. And then we did a soft launch in the summer of 22 where she read her chapter, and I read a chapter in front of an invited audience of about 50 people, mostly from our church, but other friends from just around town. And just to see, like, this is what it's going to be like. And of course, as soon as we did it, I read my chapter, people laughed like I wanted them to. And then Lauren read her chapter, and everybody's bawling at the end of her chapter. I mean, just bawling.
Yeah.
And then nobody would look me in the eye for like 2 weeks. Like, every man in that room was scared to death. Because this was a story about your sweet, homeschooled Christian wife having this torrid affair, and your marriage being ripped apart in part because which is me, was blind and selfish. And it was just every sin sort of laid bare, and it scared the crap out of a lot of people. And I was like, Lauren and I were like, well, that's what it's going to be like. I guess we'll do this.
You talked about being unaware that was going on because of your own selfishness, your own character defects that you were bringing in. And in chapter 16 of the book, you talk about that a lot. I mean, you talk about ownership an awful lot. And that stood out to me because in our story, when everything that I had been doing for so many years came out at the beginning of 2009, we started doing a lot of work individually and together. And it wasn't very long before Stacy started owning some of the stuff that she had brought that was negative into the marriage. And that was hard for me to hear her doing that because, my narrative was this was all my fault. And it, and it was, I mean, she could have brought all that negative stuff in and it still wouldn't have justified what I did. But, it's not a matter of cause, it's a matter of contribution, however you want to phrase it. There was also something that was very healing for me, that my life wasn't just all the time, look what you did, you SOB, look what you did, look what you did. I mean, there was that too, and I had a nickname whose initials were FB, and that was great. But yeah, there was something about taking ownership when it would have been so easy I'm talking to Stacy now, for you not to have, that was really powerful.
Yeah. Well, and I think early on, some of the ownership was like trying to make you, which is weird. Why would I care what you felt like in the beginning? But like,
good question.
We had a reputation, and, I grew up a missionary kid. He grew up in a Christian home. We were in, church staff. He was church staff for the whole of our marriage to that point. And I think there was some salvaging the reputation and like, look, be the good wife. And some of that I think was, well, I have my things too, which don't equal what you did. But I think some of that was not altogether healthy, but you're just surviving each day. And so I think though, at some point, whenever our therapist kept encouraging me to reach out to somebody because there weren't any recovery groups or anything like that. And she's like, this lady has been through this. And I was like, I'm not talking to somebody else. I'm not gonna be hanging out with sex addicts' wives because that's not my story and that's not gonna be my story. And then, months into the process, he's in therapy. We're both in therapy, and he's feeling better, and he's free, and this burden is unloaded. And I'm like, this is annoying. I'm still so mad, And so I was like, okay, whatever. I'll call this lady, and then she starts going through a codependent book with me, and I'm like, what is this garbage? But in reading all of the things about codependency, I was like, oh, this is how I live my life. And it's actually not healthy. It's actually not biblical even, because the way I grew up, I resonate with so much of y'all's backstories, because there's just so much that I was taught that isn't Jesus' heart, So that's when I think things shifted for me as far as starting to own even more, was when I did see, like, even just for myself, and it wasn't about because I did this, well, then of course you went and did whatever. Now there's some of that like is understandable, like how you felt. It's not that it was ever an excuse, but like, I guess understanding the dynamic of our relationship and, well, yeah, I understand how you could feel that way or whatever, but it's not owning what you did.
Yeah,
and then
it was
owning my own
surprising.
Unhealthy stuff and how I relate to other people even, just doing everything to look good and helping anybody with anything, because that's all I thought I had to offer was my help,
Well, this sort of gets into forgiveness and forgiveness territory. If you want to move into that,
would love to.
It is a complicated situation when, like, forgiveness is, because it seems like it's permissiveness sometimes. Like, I forgive you for being a terrible person, whatever. The best advice I got in all of this was from my buddy Jimbo, who's in the book. And I say this in the book. He says, he's a counselor. He wasn't my counselor. He's the front man in my band, but he's also a counselor.
Your cover band, right?
Yeah, that's right. We're the love handles. But Jimbo's a good dude, and he's a marriage and family therapist. And, he was one of my confidants in all of this. When something like this goes down, you need about 3 or 4 people that you can just talk to about all of it, in addition to your therapist, people who can, come sit with you on the porch and have a beer and, whatever, feel normal with. And Jimbo knew what was going on. And he said, in my experience as a counselor, when the betrayed spouse owns sort of their identity within the marriage, like owns who they are, what they bring to it that's not great, that's the only time that in his experience that a couple can survive infidelity is when the betrayed spouse says, hey, you're not the only idiot in this marriage. Here's how I've messed up. And it's not about balancing the scales of justice, but it is when someone has an affair. You know, Greg, you mentioned this. When someone has an affair, everybody hates you. Everybody hates you. You're a bad dude. Even people who don't even believe in marriage think you're a bad person. Like, well, man, like you can do a lot of things, but if you cheat on your spouse, you are a bad person. And that moral clarity is so toxic and poisonous for, I mean, you know, we're Christians, like, you know, check the beam in your own eye before the speck in your, spouse's eye. I mean, it's Christianity 101.
Yeah.
And so I found
until somebody does something really bad that you know.
Right. Right. And then you're like, oh, that's out the window. I mean, you see red, you want, either vengeance or there's violence and vengeance and anger, all these things are there. And so it's kind of intoxicating in a bad way when when anybody would call me and be like, I heard what happened. Your wife is so terrible. Even though I didn't want them to say that about her, she was still my wife, still the mother of my 3 children and would be for the rest of our lives. It was kind of intoxicating. Like, yeah, what she did is really bad. And this was unfair. And it elevates you as the betrayed person into this role that you don't belong in, which is I'm awesome and you're not.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, did I have an affair? No, I didn't have an affair with a person, but you could make a case that I had an affair with my career, that I had an affair with my time, that I had an affair with money. You could easily make that case. So recognizing my own faults, and I catalog those in the book to some degree. It would have been 10 books long if I would write every fault, just to show the reader, like, hey, this was what I was doing. I was like, you know what? Like, that's why, in some ways, that's why you separate, right? You can't really do that work on yourself when things get really bad unless you separate. And that's when that work really happened for me. And that made forgiveness so much more plausible. I won't say easier, but it made it so much more plausible. But forgiveness is definitely not something you do once. It is something you do. There's a reason that, 70 times, 7 times, that phrase is in the Bible, because every time you remember what happened, you have to forgive. Because as soon as you remember, all those predatory response mechanisms in your brain are like, bad, bad, bad. This thing, the other day I was playing with my wife's leg. She was just sitting on the couch. And I'm just kind of like, playing the piano on her leg. And out of nowhere, I thought, some other man has done this while we've been married. He's been affectionate with my wife on a couch, and I didn't know. And as soon as that thought comes back, it's just, you see red for a split second, like, oh, this is bad. I don't want to be thinking about this. And so that act of forgiveness is like, all right, let's just remember, forgive. Like, this is not something you want to think too much about, buddy. Move on past this, but you need to forgive. And every time you remember, and as time passes, I think you have those moments less often.
Yes.
But they do. I mean, Stacey, you can probably agree that they still come back when you're least expecting it. You'll have a thought, it's not just watching a TV show where somebody's having an affair, but something happens, a smell, the color of the light, and you're like, I don't want to be thinking about this. Yeah. And so forgiveness is continual. And I hope it's like that for Lauren. We don't talk about this all the time, but she said something, I don't even remember what it was, guys, but she accused me of something the other day. It was something small, like, you always do that. And we were kind of laughing about it. I don't remember what it was, but you could see the old resentment in her that in part made the affair easier. You could see that kind of come out. And I crossed my arms. I was like, I don't do that anymore. I haven't done that in a long time, whatever it was, I don't know, like leaving empty dishes on the counter or something. And it was really nice to see her go like, oh yeah, I guess it has been a while. I was like, so don't paint me into a corner. I was like, I don't do that anymore. I'm better now. Leave me alone. Shut up. I hate you. Yeah.
His favorite phrase these days is, let's update. Cause I tend to go back, even though our stories might be the flip flop, but I can do that, like recall things. For sure. And yes, remembering things out of nowhere is like, oh my gosh, we have been in recovery 16
How many
years.
times when we're watching a show?
How many times is this going to like, my whole body. And it's like instant. I don't have time to go, okay, that was terrible. Let me get mad again. It's like, no, it's just, but I will tell you with you doing the work, it gets less and less over time, but it doesn't ever, I think, go away, but it does get less.
And when you were saying you're forgiving over and over again, I mean, we had friends who early in our process said something that stuck, which is forgiveness is a process, not an event. Mm-hmm. It makes me think of, I was listening a little while before we recorded to your TED Talk in Savannah, and you said, love keeps no record of wrongs, but hate writes them down. Hate remembers. And it seems like in those moments, it's kind of, that's the fork in the road, isn't it? I mean, if the offense is coming back and if I dwell on it, that's a sense of emotionally and mentally writing it down again.
That's right. I have to remind myself that my wife and I, even though we have the same Social Security numbers that we used to, that we're different people. Mm-hmm. And the Lauren that did those things is a different Lauren than is here with me now. Mm-hmm. And it's a good thing to remind myself of that. And that I'm a different husband than I was before all this, and should endeavor to continue to be a different husband and continue to grow and evolve. But I have to remind myself, those were different people. They look like us. They have the same fingerprints, but they are different people.
Yeah. I love how you said it, because we say this all the time, but not quite so eloquently, about the first marriage being dead. And this is our second marriage without a divorce, but because we don't want to go back to the old, and I forget how you worded it, but like dead, buried, and let's see if something new grows, or maybe Lauren said that. I don't know which one of you said it, but I was like, yes, I resonate with that for sure.
Yeah, very much. You want to salvage what's still good about it. Like we're both still funny. We fell in love because we were funny. She liked that we're both very funny people, and I think she liked that I was ambitious and driven, which she felt would be good for the security of our family. And I loved that she was nurturing and caring and just amazing with children, which I was not. And I think we both decided to hire each other and get married and start this company together. And we still have that. She's still this super mom that every mom calls when their baby won't go to sleep. And, I'm still driven, and, I've given our family a much more stable life than she had growing up. Yeah. We're both very funny, still funny people, but those things are a little different now too. So it's still like we're exactly who we were at our best, but all the crap we've shaved off. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah, and the stuff at your best then you can really enjoy now because there's not as much stuff getting in the way.
Yeah.
I have a question. Right. Something that has annoyed me, people that are like, he is so lucky you stayed. He's so lucky, and he's, whatever. And I just like, I don't know. Yeah. Because our therapist is like, yeah, he's pretty damn lucky. But, and yes, but like, but I'm so grateful that you stayed, that you didn't choose to walk away. And I was just thinking about Lauren, like she also chose to stay and to do the work and to rebuild. And so I don't know if that's something that you have experienced or ever felt.
I've had to constantly remind myself of that, especially when I go to a dark place, that we were practically divorced, right? You guys have read the book. I mean, it was gone. Like that last phone call was me saying, hey, like, let's go ahead and do this.
It was like logistics, basically, right?
Yeah. Like I'd already met with a divorce lawyer. I was like, all right, I'd been resistant and felt like I had tried every possible strategy to save the marriage. And it was obvious that it wasn't going to be saved, at least not by me. And so we were divorced in all but name. And she had her own place, which she could afford. And she had her own budget. She had her own income. She had her own car. I was still paying the car insurance and health insurance, and that would all have to get worked out and, whatever. And we had talked a little bit about how we would pay for tuition for the girls, how we would handle that. Like we'd already had all those conversations. And so she had every opportunity and an open door to end the marriage. And the fact that she chose to turn. I mean, when she came back And it's complicated. You have to read the book. It was very messy there at the end and very, very dramatic. But when she finally walked up the driveway with her suitcase at the end of that whole nightmare, I just looked at her like, are you going to live here again? Like, what's going to happen? And I was a single dad. I was good at it by then, man.
Hung up a lot of, what did you hang up everywhere? The hooks. You hung up everywhere.
I put hooks. She hates hooks, man. I put hooks up everywhere. And I hung all these pictures and bought new art. And, I have the weirdest art, and I hung it all over the house. I'm like, I can't wait till she sees this crap. She's going to hate it. And so she's walking up the driveway, and I just looked at her and I was like, do you want to be married to me? Like, it wasn't a rhetorical question. Like, after all this, do you want to be married to me? And she gave me the most honest answer. She said, I'd like to try.
Yep.
I'd like to try. And I was like, that's all you can really do in a marriage is try to be married.
So true.
And so I was like, all right, well, I think I'd like to try. So let's shake on it and give it a shot. We didn't know. When she came back, we didn't know if we were going to make it, but we thought we'd try. And it has worked. We're still married.
So you talk a lot about your new church friends, not new friends, but your friends from the church that started. Talk a little bit about what it was like to have church friends walking through that, who were safe, who were supportive, who made things better and not worse. Because a lot of us have experiences with church and people in the church where there may have been good intentions or at least neutral intentions, but it actually made it worse. But for you, it sounds like it was just, well, it doesn't sound like it's an exaggeration to say that it was life-giving. What was that like, for you in the midst of it and for both of you since?
It was very strange. It was very strange to have, quote, church friends that I loved. That was really weird.
Who would come and help you beat up a guy if necessary.
Yes, these guys. There really are two kinds of churches in the world. And, there's a great quote. I don't know who said it. Somebody famous said it. They wish that church could be more like AA. And this person said, well, it can be as long as Christians are okay with being as honest as alcoholics are.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And, it's a cliche, but in the evangelical church in the South, people just aren't honest about what's really going on because the church is so tied up with status in so many communities, especially in the South.
Yeah.
And so you can't, if your church cares about status, even if they don't say they do, you can tell. You just look around and look at the building, you look how people are dressed, you look at the budget, you look how much the pastor makes. If that's status, then you can't put that at risk. And vulnerability puts that at risk and can tear that apart. Yeah. As I say in the book, it takes a lot of money to keep lights on at a big church. And you need as many donations as you can. And there has to be a sort of veil of a fairy tale to that. You might have a parish group or a small group, whatever, community group. And within that group, you may have a couple of buddies that you can secretly go off and talk to and tell them what's really going on. But nobody who runs the church, nobody who shepherds that church really knows what everybody's doing. And that's the kind of churches that I had belonged to. And where when something happens like an affair, well, we have to condemn that. We have to condemn that affair. So she has to either break it off right now or leave. And as you know from the book, it took years for her to end the affair.
Right.
And judgment would have ended our marriage. If I had been as judging as these other churches wanted me to be, I would not be married to Lauren today. So our new church, which has been going now for about 6 or 7 years, it seems like yesterday, is very small. We're up to about 100 people now. It's got a slightly different vibe, but it's always been kind of, we call it, Muppet church. It's kind of weird and it's a little bit chaotic. You never know quite what's going to happen. But it's a confessional church. It's a Presbyterian church. It wasn't so much that I had church friends. It was that I had friends and we went to church together. I knew I needed some wise people to talk to. And I had a lot of offers of very wise people that I didn't even know. They were like, "Oh, you got to talk to this lady who is this." Like, I met all these like informal marriage gurus that are out there floating, that have been through something like this, and they're not therapists, but they just walk with people through things like this. I met so many amazing people in this experience, but I needed somebody down the street that I could call if I say, "You got to go pick up my kids today because I'm dealing with a nightmare over here." I needed people like that. And that's what those guys became. And, you know, it wasn't just me laying burdens on them. You know, they lay a lot on me and the rest of our group of friends. And there are situations I'm in right now with close friends where I'm on the other side of it. I'm the guy that's helping them while they're going through the nightmare. And it's so strange to be on the other side of that now. And I'm like, I was giving this guy some pretty rough advice. Like, you need to pull your britches up, son, and XYZ. That's my football coach dad coming out. And I was like, hold up, Harrison. It's like, how would you need to hear this? 5 years ago, what would you need to hear? Okay, like, all right, tone it down a little bit. You don't always need to be a football coach.
Let me take a second run at that.
And everybody's so different because, I mean, with what we do, I'm walking with the spouses, the wives who are going through betrayal trauma. And there are some who, and my one really good friend, I was like, I straight up told her this. I said, this is what I want to say, but I'm not going to say that. But like, there are sometimes I'm just like, it's not working.
There are many times.
Right. It's like, but they have to know beyond the shadow of a doubt that that's what they need to do. And if they're not there yet, then why would I need to push them to do that? You know,
you don't want her to hurt.
I don't want her to hurt. That's right. And it's like, enough already. But people gave me advice that I didn't appreciate, you know, and so
you get a lot of bad advice.
Yes.
You get a lot of bad advice, and you have to, you have to be so wise and discerning when you're going through something like this, because you get conflicting advice about things. The best advice, this wasn't really advice, but a truism that Soren has said before, and he said to me, and then I've said to other people. Soren is the pastor of our church and another one of my close friends that was helpful through this. You know, with me, he was like, dude, like, Jesus says you can go ahead and get divorced, buddy. Like, you've seen all the evidence. Things look like they might not work out. If you really want to pull the plug, like, you can, and you should have no shame about that. But you'll regret not fighting for the marriage. Even if you get divorced, you'll regret not fighting for it. Like, did I do everything? And I've talked to divorced people. I'm like, how did you feel about your divorce 10 years later? And they're like, definitely the best thing I ever did. And other people would say, if you really pushed them on it, they'd say, I may have rushed it. I may have made a mistake. Maybe we still would have gotten divorced, but I'll never know because I didn't try to save it. I just took the first get out of jail free card and I got right out of that jail. And so I tell that to people now, like, look, man, it sounds like y'all might be headed down that road real fast, but at least try to fight for it. Try to save it. So you will always know that you tried.
And I didn't hear you saying this, but it's just occurring to me. I think it's important to say it out loud that forgiveness doesn't mean that you necessarily stay married. Those two are not linked to each other, and the only way you can have forgiveness is to stay married and the other way around.
No.
Well, I know we're almost out of time. A couple of quick questions. I'm just curious, you're pretty diversified in what you do in terms of communication. I mean, you're a professor at SCAD, right? And you write books, you write in short form articles, and you do speaking. Is there something that currently in your life you enjoy the most?
Nothing is quite as rewarding as writing. Just sitting at the desk and just hammering away. But man, I'm kind of I need to make some decisions about what I want to do next, because I have an idea for a musical.
Oh, cool.
And a play adaptation of the marriage book. Oh, cool. We're already pitching a TV pilot based on the book. And so I've learned a lot about TV writing and really enjoyed getting into that. One thing I want to do, I turned 50 this year. And so one of the gifts I'm going to give myself is I want to go try stand-up. I haven't done stand-up in 25 years. And I want to give it a shot again, just locally, just to sort of see what it's like. There's no thrill like live performance, but intellectually and emotionally, the thrills come at the keyboard. So I'm a little bit split on writing and speaking. I do love to do all of it. I'm a ridiculous person, and I just love to make people laugh. And I just love the emotional sort of quotient and that's happening when you're in front of people speaking to them and they don't know what you're going to say next. It's just, there's nothing like it. It is the best drug, and it's exhilarating, and it makes me feel alive. So I'll never stop. Sometimes I think I write books just so I can have an excuse to talk about them to other people.
Yeah.
And that's what made this book so hard, because all of a sudden I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. And so it was very ironic, but yeah, I do love all those things. And I like playing music. I'm in the church band, which is so weird to me.
I was going to say, if you're in a Muppet church and you're the sometimes barefoot drummer, does that make you animal?
Definitely. I'm very generally well behaved, but it's so much fun to, I grew up Church of Christ, so we didn't have any instruments in church. And now my mom, who was also Church of Christ, she's a Presbyterian, and she's in the sanctuary, which is in a theater. It's Savannah's oldest theater building, which is very weird, where Edwin Booth and John Wilkes Booth performed.
Wow.
Our church is meeting there, and I'm playing the drums, and it's I love it. It's so much fun, and there's just something like we only have like 30 minutes to rehearse before church every Sunday, all 5 songs that we play. And there's something kind of exhilarating about not knowing if we're going to be able to pull them off in front of all these people.
And it probably doesn't matter all that much if you don't. Well,
they wouldn't know.
Savannah is such a cool place. Our daughter and son-in-law lived there for a couple of years when they first got married, and we came to visit them. Just such a cool place to be.
It is. It's an awesome town.
Well, certainly can't wait to see what's next, whether that's a TV pilot or another book or just, more great conversations. But we can't thank you enough, Harrison, for just letting us go back to your story and talk about what that was like.
Well, I appreciate y'all sharing y'all's story too, because this was a really good conversation. I feel like we could talk for 4 or 5 hours if we needed to.
Absolutely. Well, and I appreciate, I don't like to sit down and read books, so I listen when I can. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for actually reading it yourself. Literally in my car laughing. And then yes, I'm feeling it. and even Lauren's chapter, it's like, oh, of course, this is kind of how the path went because of her backstory. And so I just really appreciate it. And I know some of my friends have also listened or read.
A lot of our friends were very excited to hear that we were going to be talking to you.
Yeah.
So, and I hope we get many more chances to talk with you later. What were you going to say?
Well, I think I've heard a lot of, I never thought about this, but I've heard a lot of people say, like, they didn't know that Lauren had a chapter in the book, and they were listening to the audiobook. And then when they heard her voice, it's like near the end,
right,
that they were like, they took their breath away, that they were so shocked after hearing me drone on for 7 hours. And all of a sudden this new voice comes out. And that was really cool to think about that. Like, I never really thought about that, but I do like to hear
again. Yes. I was like, oh my gosh. Hear her perspective.
I was in the studio with her when she recorded that, because I did my part of the book first, and then it was time for her. And so the studio is like right down the street from her house. So and she came, and I was in the booth with the producer, and it was just so sweet, because she was so nervous. And then she did a practice run, and then she did another one, and it was really special to see her do that, and to know how hard that was for her, being pretty introverted, and she killed it. And also, if anybody will tell you, she's funnier than I am. She's way kinder, somehow also meaner, and much funnier than I am.
Well, I wish we could all go out for margaritas and queso.
Next time we come to Savannah, and then we'll get some Leopold's ice cream.
Heck yeah, man.
Well, thank you so much. Again, so grateful for a chance to talk.
Yes,
Hope we can do it again soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
really
your
enjoyed
wife,
it.
too.
I will. Bye-bye.
All right.
We'd love to hear from you. If you have questions, feedback, topics you'd like to hear us talk about on the show, click the Send Us a Message link in the show notes of any episode.